figure I'm up here at this point only because I don't know exactly where the cameras are pointing. But I figure I ought to introduce myself because I know you sort of know me, but don't necessarily know me. My name's Bill McNally. I have been the contest coordinator for the past 5 years or so. And I am really a classical pianist by trade. I am playing Rachmaninoff and Stravinsky and Bach and Beethoven and Brahms about 11 months out of the year, and then I have like this 1 month where I'm off the leash and I'm doing all of this ragtime activity. That's not entirely true, but that's pretty close to the truth. And I've been an academic my whole life. So that means that mostly I have taught in a classical music environment, and I have a lot of praise for that approach to music, and I also have a lot of concerns and disagreements with how it's taught a lot of the time. And one of the big disagreements, of course, comes down to the issue of improvisation and how true one needs to be to the score. So if you think about, for example, complete recordings of the Scott Joplin rags, some of them are incredibly bookish and very, very tied to the notes, and then some of them are very, very free and flexible. So, you know, if you try to compare, say, Nocky Parker's Scott Joplin to Richard Dowling's Rivermont release, they're extremely, extremely different approaches to the same exact music. So my goal is not to try to sort out who you should be. My goal is, how can we use this instrument to be the most communicative we can be? And with that in mind, I want to just kind of ask all three of you, my students of the hour, why do you like music? In one sentence, why do you like music? Max, you're in on that question too. Why do you like music? It's fun. Okay. Sure. You can express yourself in many different ways, do all kinds of things. It makes the world come alive, absolutely. Jared, what do you think?
No, I'm not exactly sure the answers I was going to say are taken.
Well, it's a question that's worth wrestling with. I mean, your whole musical professional lives. Why do I like music? It makes me feel. It forces me to feel. I can't avoid it. I can't escape that. And ragtime is sort of notoriously perky. So one of the things that's always on my mind is it needs more dimension than that. I think I probably shouldn't say a whole lot more. We should get straight to the playing, but this is one of the reasons why I wanted to start with magnetic rags. So, Anderson, would you perform a magnetic rag for us? Very nice, Henderson. I'm going to hand you a microphone here. There you go.
Thank you.
So I have a couple of questions for you right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell me about the piece and the composer and about his life when he wrote it?
Yeah, so Scott Joplin, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this was his last drag written in 1914. It was a little bit more while he was in his like classical dance and European classical era. He was starting to get into that and away from ragtime. So it kind of reflects a little of that. Some of the parts are not typical to ragtime, so some experts say that it kind of reflects the insanity that was going on in his mind at that point.
Well, this all sounds very personal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that becomes a danger to a piece like this is allowing it to become flashy,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a statement of introspection. It's a statement of personal circumstance. I want to start with something that's kind of basic and technical to the piano, and this kind of is a demonstration. I'm going to hop in here for a moment. We'll probably hop back and forth a bunch of times.
Okay.
But this one's about pedaling, and this one, for those of you in the audience who are not really going to be able to see what I'm talking about very clearly, but when one pushes the pedal down on the piano, the entire movement of that pedal mechanism is roughly, slightly more than an inch. It's not much. Sometimes it's less than an inch. It depends on the piano. But within that inch, the top third of it, absolutely nothing happens. Nothing engages. Then the middle third, all of the dampers lift off the string. And then the bottom third, once again, the dampers are already off the strings, nothing happens. So this is a polite admonishment. Don't stomp the pedal.
Okay.
And that's anyone. There's no need for it. The piano does not thank you for it. And it creates a percussive sound that, if you want a drum set, invite a drummer.
Yeah.
If you really want to get into stomping your left foot, train your left foot. But I think there's so much room to be flexible with a pedal. For example, if it's not an on-off switch, no pedal, fully pedaled. But what about stuff like, the kinds of sounds that you can get with all the shading in between? It's just an open opportunity. So, take advantage of all that gray space in there. The next one, you played such a dynamically expressive piece. And if we think about the ragtime form, if we think about classic ragtime form, usually we have the A strain, the B strain, then we go back to the A strain, then there's a C strain, and half the time there's a D strain, right? But why? Why is that effective? Well, the whole point of this music, there's the rhythm, there's the flavor of the style itself, but then there's the storytelling. And the storytelling needs to have a logical plot, right? So in the case of Magnetic Rag, we have a really unusual plot progression. We have A, B, C, D, A, which I don't know of any other rag that was written in that particular form. When we get to Cascades, we also have another unusual form. It's just A, B, C, D. It never goes back, but it really changes the storytelling. And as listeners, we're always trying to, we're dependent on repetition of ideas. We need it in almost any kind of music. Once we get some musical idea, we need to be able to hold on to that idea. So when I'm playing Magnetic Rag, and I start at the beginning of this, I'm always thinking about how am I going to get all the way back around to the A strain? How am I going to return to that? And so I have a personal approach to the storytelling. I always think of the A strain as being simple ragtime and the personality of Scott Joplin. I think of the B strain, he's living in New York at that time. I think of the B strain as being Scott Joplin living in, kind of just south of the Tenderloin district in New York City, in a community that is absolutely filled with Orthodox Jews. So he's hearing all of this kind of Jewish music It's just in his ears, and you can really hear that flavor in the B strain. In the C strain, you start to hear this encroaching sound of this new style that's a little further uptown that eventually becomes jazz. In the D strain, we take a very different turn. We aim towards kind of the personal anguish and frustration that Joplin has been experiencing professionally as he tries to get his opera Treemonisha produced. And then the only solution to that whole story is to come back to the A strain and come back to simple, elegant, wonderful classic ragtime. So I want to play a couple of fragments of this, and then I want to tinker around with you and see where we can take this.
All right, that sounds good.
By the way, you were very dynamically expressive, but a lot of times it felt spiky.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't have a little bit of continuity,
Right.
it can interrupt that storytelling. It's just an introduction. It doesn't need more. If it's really, where can the storytelling go now? So we need to somehow set up the rest of the story. So. By the way, always reaching for that top. I want more of the B flat on the top voice. But I'm not trying to get too dynamically adventurous just yet. I'll have an opportunity to get there, right? So then when I get into the next strain, so I'm doing a couple of things here. I have entirely changed the flavor of my left hand. There's a very different touch to it. In the first strain, and then that changes the character without interfering with the melody storytelling. So. And that's an expression. We don't need those notes. It's still beautiful and complete without those two notes. Right? It still works really well. But that punctuation is really what gives that strain its character. Right? You hear an expression, you hear this exclamation right there. Take advantage of that. When you get into the jazz section, add a little bit of pedal because now jazz is more about harmony. And this is like ragtime pokes its head back in, just for 2 measures. So. So this character is now going back and forth, and it's this internal argument between jazz and ragtime. The pain. Now that's a weird little episode. It's naked. It doesn't have a left hand going oompa underneath it. It doesn't have extra rhythmic activity. It's just this parallel tenths walking chromatically up, and that's it. It needs all of the care and attention it can have. And then the return. What a relief that moment is, right? So the idea that you make it to the last strain, and now it's time for. It doesn't work for me. I think it's always tempting to build up to a grand and massive ending,
Right.
but I'm not sure that it tells the story authentically.
Sure. Yeah.
So, can I invite you to just play some snippets now?
Sure.
Yes. Right from the beginning. Okay. Two different little statements. Why? And then the next one is, if we have that much contrast and activity already, we're limiting how much expressive space we're going to have after that. By the way, I'm going to point out a small fingering item. And by the way, fingering is so important. It's so underrated, but it's so important. I see that you're reaching for that E flat with your second finger as to avoid placing your thumb on a black key. Thumbs on black keys are fine, as long as you're not playing a scale and going past it. So since the passage is, the thumb is just going to work better. Yeah, you'll have much more control over the sound of the note. And we want to care about the sound of every note. Every note matters. Okay, now, for that, can you really just lean your weight on that? And this finger is just going to be a feather. This one weighs a brick. This one weighs a feather. And you've voiced a melody. Right? Trust that top voice. And the difference in balance can really be like 80%, 20% there. All right? I think you can get more out of it. I'm gonna push you for this. I mean, really think fortissimo and pianissimo. That note's pianissimo. How do we balance that? There we go. So this really learning to find balance in chords in one hand takes a lot of experimentation, but it's really about letting gravity do the work. The more you tense up your arm, the more you're not going to be able to distribute weight into one finger or another finger. The more you let gravity be your friend, you're going to be able to put weight on one note and be very light on another. Tell you what, play this first, play that. Now, while you're holding it, I want you to lean on that, and I want you to see how light that finger can feel. See, it's all tense right in here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, relax that. Hold the notes, but now just be heavy there. And you can lean your body on it too. Right? You don't have to lean sideways. Just, as if you're using the piano to help you stand up. All right? There it is. Now play. You forced. It's there. It's starting to emerge. And this kind of learning voicing, it doesn't happen overnight. if you're really diligent about it, a month or two of tinkering with it, and it will become second nature. And once it's there, it's there. You'll keep that ability to voice any chord, any time for the rest of your life. I mean, if you're playing a Rachmaninoff prelude, if you're playing a Chopin prelude, you're going to need the exact same technique. You're going to need that same approach to the music. All right, I have 4 of you this morning. Thank you so much. We're going to have to move on, but
Thank you very much.
bravo. And we have now a Cascades rearranged. Bravo. Really beautifully played. I guess one of my first questions here is the C strain your favorite strain?
Yes.
And the one that you worked on the most, right? So, I mean, the C strain is notorious amongst the Scott Joplin output for being one of the most awkward and virtuosic left-hand moments. And it's hard. It's a tricky passage, and you really played that expressively and cleanly and reliably. And this is just kind of a reminder. I mean, of course, yesterday everybody was competing. How many of you felt like when you competed, you played exactly the way that you had practiced it and practiced it and practiced it? Huh? Okay. Good for you. I can rarely pull that off. But it's what we try to do. And then we find ourselves on stage, and several things happen at once. First, we are aware of an audience. The environment is different. Second, we're excited to be on stage, maybe a little bit nervous, and that kicks this, the hamster wheel into overdrive. And let's try some new ideas. And they're going to be little ideas, but those new ideas are not prepared, they're not formed. And I'm not suggesting that that's necessarily what you did, but I think sometimes setting that tempo so that it's reliable and calm and where you want to be, it's that tendency to overshoot that by about 10% that gets us into trouble a lot of the time. So knowing the exact tempo that you're going to start, how do you determine your tempo when you start Cascades?
Usually the intros are pretty good, sense.
I think in this case, the intro is a disaster to pick tempo. The reason I think it's a disaster for choosing tempo, here, hold on to this for a moment. It's off for now, but the reason I think it's a disaster is it has no 16th notes. All right? How is that going to keep me on the leash I need to stay in control and command of the piece? I need to go in my mind to the hardest part of the piece. And I need to play that a couple times in my head. And I need to play that vividly in my imagination, vividly enough that I can imagine what it feels like to play that. And as I'm feeling that beat, then I start thinking, how can I apply that to the intro? Then I play my intro. So I would like you to play just the couple of measures that you think are the hardest two measures of this piece for you. Okay, so that arpeggio tends to get you in trouble, right? Okay, fine. Did you like how you just played it now?
Yeah.
Then start the piece with that.
With that section or with that attitude?
With that attitude, with that character, with that tempo. Okay, now hang on. How much more in control do you feel right now?
A little more.
Right? So knowing how to set the tempo at the beginning of a piece, that's a big deal, all right? A lot of us, there's one particular pianist that's active in ragtime circles named Paul Asaro, who we are just in awe that every single time he sits down to play anything, he nails the tempo. His first note to his second note are in tempo. Almost all of us have a tendency to spend that first measure of a piece getting to the tempo that we really want. Sometimes it takes more than a measure. But really just nailing it right out of the gate, that takes a lot of practice and awareness. So, all right, my second question for you is about the character of the piece. So, what can you tell me about Cascades?
Well, to be honest, I don't know too much about it. I know Scott Joplin wrote it. It was one of his many rags, and it was written in 1904, which was kind of, I want to say, kind of early, middle career, kind of, almost. But yeah, so that's the
That about sums it up. I'll just add one thing to that a lot of times, and Magnetic Rag is a good example of this, chances are really good that Scott Joplin had nothing to do with giving it a name. Maybe he did. But Magnetic Rag, we have no connection to anything magnetic, both in the physical sciences or in the world of relationships, or we have no idea why it's Magnetic Rag. Cascades, on the other hand, is one of the few that it has a very clear title. It was written to commemorate the very stunningly beautiful fountains of the St. Louis World's Fair, okay? And so it's all about the cascading waterfalls, which tells us something about the character of the piece in this case. 4 strains, but 4 not nearly as different strains as we had in Magnetic Rag. It's a much more homogeneous piece in terms of character, which means you have to do other things, right? If the character remains rather similar. So you have the advantage in Magnetic Rag of completely gear shifting, completely changing your character from strain to strain. You have to maintain something, right? So I think we're now into kind of fussier territory with how we're going to manage that. And so I'm going to hop on for a couple minutes here with just a couple of ideas and observations. By the way, as a classical pianist, I am still dependent on the notes on the page. Cascades, I think I performed it many years ago, but one of the first things I wanted to point out, you tend to sit far back on the bench, like hanging off the back a little on the bench, okay? And the reason I point that out is if you sit far enough back on the bench, you have no weight that you can lean forward into the instrument with. I think that, you know, it's not like we need to put all of our torso mass into the keys, but we need to have it in reserve. We need to be able to lean at the keys. Right? It gives us the option of letting weight do the job instead of any physical tension do the job, okay? Second, I'm going to come back to the topic of the pedal. You weren't stomping, but you were sort of lifting your foot just above the top. So I'm going to get really graphically specific with the pedal now. Heel on the ground. Ball of the foot on the front edge of the pedal. And you can be really that specific. At that point, there are a lot of bones in our feet, but this way, there's only a single bone. In other words, it's a simple lever. All right? The more we can simplify that physical element of pedaling, the more control we're going to have over it, right? People that pedal with their toes have a tendency to pedal muddier. They have a tendency to let off the pedal slower. So heel always stays on the ground. If I see this, you know, that's operating, you know, some kind of machinery, but it's not pedaling the piano. So I'm also going to come back to the pedal as what do we use the pedal for? We use the pedal not to hold harmonies together, but to enrich the sound itself. So let me play the same chord with and without pedals, and I just want you to hear the difference in a single chord. Without. With. How many of you heard a difference? I tried to play it as close to the same dynamic as possible. So it sounds very similar, but there's just this extra warmth to it, right? Why? Because when you pedal, you're lifting the dampers off of all the strings, which means that it's possible to get all 88 strings on the piano vibrating. And that little bit of extra ambient sound, that adds a lot to music. However, in Cascades, when we have there's all of this stepwise motion in the melody. And if we pedal through that, here's what we get. Right? And all mushed together, it's absolute muck, right? Now, you didn't do that. But you did pedal by the left-hand harmony. So in ragtime, we tend to change harmonies on left-hand chords. Right? That makes sense, right? But if we do that with this kind of melody, we get this. And it's busy enough and quick enough that it isn't completely muddy, but it's there. It's an issue. We only need little drops. Right? So I'm pedaling for like 1/16th note out of every quarter. There we can. Maybe just the beginning of it. Now here. One harmony. Now we can lay it on thick. And now we have a change in character we can actually use. Right? So let me invite you to just play the first two, the first half of the A string. Before we get to our big moment here at the big arpeggio, I want you to try this again with no pedal at all. Okay. What do you think? Right. It sounds cleaner. It sounds more like a melody we can follow. Now, I'm not going to advocate that you do absolutely no pedal at all, but a very little bit goes a long way. And, well, actually, a topic that, it would be kind of fun to have this hall completely packed to talk about this, but we want to be able to play to the last person in the person in the last row of the hall, right? So by the time the sound kind of bounces around all the walls and gets all the way back there, that is already its own pedaling effect, right? We're already going to be muddying the sound to some degree. So if you haven't done this, every time I play in a venue that I am not familiar with, I have somebody out in the hall telling me how wet or dry is the sound in this hall. Always. And it better be somebody I trust. So it's incredibly important feedback because what we hear on the stage is very acoustically different from what they're getting out there, okay? It sounded not over-pedaled up here, but out there, if you're pedaling fully on every quarter note, double the mud, okay? The other thing that I think will help a lot is to rebalance between your melody and your harmony. See what happens if you give the melody about 80% of the total sound, which doesn't mean to push the melody, it just means really, really relax and lighten up the left hand. See what happens. Okay. We got to about 55-45. Exaggerate it way more than you think you need to. Okay, now with no pedal. Okay, I like what I'm hearing. It brings a different problem now, doesn't it? What's the different problem?
It's very rigid.
It's somewhat rigid. It also reveals a much more challenging technical problem. How absolutely evenly and under control can we get those 16th notes now, right? All of a sudden, we are far more revealing in how we're presenting the music, right? So, I mean, I saw you, all of a sudden that right hand is like, please work. Okay, so no tension. Let gravity do the work. Try that one more time. Okay, that sounded, I thought, a lot better. I really, really enjoyed that one. Now, I want you to try this one more time, and I want you to think of the pedaling as seasoning. Just, how much salt? I mean, Do you put like spoonfuls of salt on your steak? Right? So no, just tiny little bits, just enough to flavor the sound that you're already getting. And then take it through our arpeggio. Yeah, this really sounds like a different character. Now, I'm going to chase you off one more time.
Please do.
And so even within this much more homogeneous Scott Joplin piece, there are 3 different characters that we just got in those opening 8 measures. So here they are. Classic ragtime. Sorry, and then really define for yourself exactly what character you want out of that little episode. Right? So each one of these moments has such totally different character. Now I want you to try to assemble all of this into one thought, because we can all make these kinds of drastic changes in 10 minutes. Thank you so much, Leo. All right, thanks. And I'm going to bring up Max next for a very different character of piece. And if there are no enormous complaints, I'll probably run a little past 10 o'clock. I know that we have the 10:55 church service, if any of you are attending that, but hopefully going 10 or 15 minutes long won't interrupt that too terribly. So, Max Libertor and Arthur Schatz Blue and the Black Keys. Thank you, Max. So some nice light morning music. Let me get my coffee. Really, it's notoriously one of the most awkward pieces written by one of the most virtuosic composers of the slightly post-ragtime era. We often refer to this style of music as novelty piano, but Arthur Schutt was kind of an unusual character. He was a band pianist for the most part, and of the pieces that he had published, only Blue and the Black Keys was published with a virtuosity that was akin to what Schutt himself was playing. He had 5 or 6 other tunes published, but they were all very, very watered down and simplified arrangements. Or in a couple of cases, they were songs or kind of band piano parts that were just kind of sold off as piano solos. So Blue and the Black Keys is the only real artifact we have that demonstrates Arthur Schutt's rather unique piano style. I want to kind of dive into that just a little bit, but also kind of explore what makes novelty musically different from ragtime. And I'm going to, put it down a little bit for a moment. I'm going to say that a lot of times the biggest challenge to navigating an Arthur Schutt piece is trying to figure out a character in there, because it's hard to pin down a melody most of the time. There's so much activity going on in all of these different parts, but there are all of these pianistic gestures and flourishes, and it's the bag of tricks, and it's a phenomenal bag of tricks. And so we're busy kind of being dazzled by it, but we need something to bring it all together too. So you're doing some wonderfully creative stuff with how you have adapted and made changes to the left hand, particularly in the A strain. So I'm really, really enjoying that. But I also want to figure out how we can use the right hand to actually be melodically expressive. On a broader subject, before we dive back into it, I think about, what are our priorities in any music? What are the most important elements in any music? And I keep coming back to the idea that time is where the real artistry is. The craft of playing the piano is in the voicing, is in the ability to shape a melody, is in the ability to pedal well and effectively, and all of these things. But what really, really makes a solid performance elevate to the level of real artistry is what we do with time. And it has to be subtle, because we are dependent on a beat. We call it a beat using the same word that we use to have a heartbeat, right? And sometimes I think your music might be going into cardiac arrest. There's a tendency for the actual tempos, there's so much push and pull that it risks being a distraction more than an artistic expression. And, it's a fine line there. So I want you to try something. I want you to try playing the introduction just straighter. Establish something. Give us some stability upon which we can rest the rest of the piece. Go ahead. To me, that really establishes a tempo that we can work with and push the rest of the piece forward with. I want to talk voicing also, and I've known you for 1.5 years now, but you live in California, you live in the LA area, chances are things are tight. I know you have multiple siblings, so there's probably a limit to how much space sometimes. Are you able to pull your bench out at home?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, then give yourself some space. Pull the bench out a little bit. And then are you working on an acoustic piano or an electric piano most of the time?
Both, but more often acoustic.
Okay, okay. I want to encourage you to really move the balance a little bit more towards the right hand. I love the piano beginning, but I want to show you what I got. I think that's safe. Maybe not. Yeah, hang on, stand. So, well, there's a lot of top, but then it kind of keeps moving back and forth between the left and right hands. It's a little bit unstable. And I want to try to keep these at continuous levels. Right? So, so then we have two layers to this right hand activity. We have so which melody do we want to bring out? Do we just want to bring out that top voice? Or do we want to bring out everything? It's maybe too much already. So let's keep it a little simpler because we want it to be digested. Now that it's familiar, we can open it up a little bit. There's such a warm, what a terrific chord, right? So if we don't have great melodies to work with, we do have some really cool harmonies and beautifully spaced chords. And then we have that same problem. That's it. That's all, right? That's a whole lot of notes to say something that simple, though, right? So as long as that idea comes out, everything else just supports that idea. Go for it.
The bench feels too far.
Sorry?
The bench feels too far.
Well, then slide yourself forward on it. Better for you to be towards the front of a bench than sitting all over it.
Now I feel like I'm going to fall off the bench.
I'll take that risk.
Bill's gonna dive in and catch you.
Where do you want me to
Okay, now, I'm going to be mean here for a moment. You have that big reach down to that left hand, and you want to make sure you play the right note, and so you're taking extra time there. And we all saw it, right? This much. The thing is, the more we're inclined to sit on the back part of the bench, the more we're going to avoid leaning in towards the piano, and the more we replace gravity with tension in the forearm. And so from a purely physical standpoint, we really want to avoid that if we can, all right? Now, if we were 6 years old, this would be a more important issue. But you know, as you know, close to or fully grown people, we have enough body mass that it's not a big deal. But it's still important to have, again, just that reserve of being able to lean at the instrument instead of kind of curl over it. There's a big difference between kind of hunching your back and playing tight and being able to just lean on it. I mean, when I lean on the piano, it's just this, right? I am, about 185 pounds. If I'm leaning on this, I'm only leaning about 5 pounds onto it. But it's from 0 to 5 pounds. That's pretty much all I really want to use at the piano. So I'm actually thinking in terms of how many pounds of weight, how many ounces of weight am I giving into each note I play? And am I physically positioned to be efficient about that? So I have a saying that I tell all of my long-term students, and it takes a while to kind of develop this idea, but what I tell them is pianistic technique is finding the physically most efficient way to get exactly the sound you want. So the sound is first. You have to imagine the music, you have to imagine the sound. But I want to find the physically most efficient way to do that, because the more efficient it is, the more under control it will be, all right? If you sit back on the bench, it just isn't the most efficient way to get there.
Wait, was I saying?
Towards it. You're sitting in a way where, here, let me just demonstrate on a bench, and kind of so that the audience can see. If I'm sitting on the back of the bench, of my 185 pounds, I have maybe 35 or 40 pounds on my feet connected to the floor, right? And then the rest of me is on my butt. The moment I start playing the piano, I have a third point of contact, and I can transfer some of that body weight into the piano. But if I do this and keep most of my body weight here, I no longer can sort of move that weight into the piano. All I can really do is sort of force my arm at the piano, and that's a very different feeling than being able to lean me into it, all right? I never have to give more than necessary if it's just me. Yeah, play from back there now. How about right from the A string? Mm-hmm. Not by accents. Okay, play just the melody. No, you're giving me everything. Yeah, just. Okay, so we have the da da dum da 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 da. Okay. How do you want this to sound? Do you want? All right, or. What's the shape? What do you want out of those three notes? What's the gesture? Forget about the B flat. Forget the B flat. Just that melody on top. What's the character? Play those three notes, just the three notes. Play the three notes exactly musically the way you want them. Okay, so da 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 da. Is it? Where's the F? Tell you what, try it. Forget about your normal fingering when you have all the other notes. Just play 2, 1, 3. Now, do you really want da 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 da? I don't know. We have to know. We have to know exactly what we want from a little shape like that. And knowing, by the way, half the time it's simply making a choice. You don't have to go fishing for the reason for the choice all the time. Sometimes it's just make the choice. How do you want those three notes to sound? How exactly do you want those three notes to sound? I think you're whispering them now. No shyness. Da da da. Tell you what, play the very first chord. Both hands. Okay. What feeling does that give you? Is it a dry, crunchy character, or is it a character that has warmth and richness?
I'm autistic. I don't know.
Okay. I think this has, to me, it has a lot of richness to it. I think it's a, it's a beef stew of a chord. It is not saltines. It is not celery. All right? And I think with that richness, we need a melody that has some warmth to its shape. So if we play these 3 notes, lean into the E flat, resolve it. So resolution is always a little bit less than the stressed note, right? And then release it. But it's not a staccato, it's not a careless release. All right, try just that.
I think I'm tempted to like almost staccato just because, I let go of the pedal because it goes right back to the F.
Ah, you have more time than you think. Focus on playing that da. Yeah, da da. Don't move earlier than you need to.
I missed the note.
Okay. Ah, I heard. Make sure they have a relationship. All 3 notes need to relate to each other sound-wise. There we go. Okay, now, keep it at a slow tempo for a moment. And put that all together. Dee da 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 dee. Ah, I lost the voicing. I got, so a good E flat there. But then it went all to the A flat. When, ah. Now, what I'd like you to try is just both hands now. Put that all together. I want you to focus on the melody, and I want you to focus on, is that da 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 the same idea in all 3 octaves? I liked it. And this is a technically challenging enough piece that this is not going to come all at once. You really, really have to spend time finding ways to make it clean and communicating these ideas. I'm going to throw out one other small idea, and then we're going to have to move on to our last pianist. We're already technically over time, but let me hop on for just a moment. The bridge between the B strain and the C strain is a tricky bridge. So I'll play it first, and then kind of show you a couple of things that are solutions to it. We play it a little bit differently, but it's that first opening chord progression that's challenging. So the rhythm, ba-da-ba-da-ba-bam-bam-bam. It's nice that the hand position is the same in pairs of notes. This is a kind of a bigger chord because the left hand isn't available, but then the left hand's available for the bottom note for all the others. Okay? So, at this position, 2 white keys on the bottom and a black key on top. And 2 white keys on the bottom and a black key on top. Then the black key is in the middle. Then the black key is in the bottom voice. Okay? Which means different wrist positions for all 3 chords. If you actually kind of break it up, well, it's possible, but we have a different. Well, there's a problem. The problem is we lose the top voice. There's no melody. So changing that wrist position allows you to access the melody differently. Okay. I still want. That's the important part of that. So for all the notes that are going on, we still just need to hear a whole tone scale. And the other notes are important, but not as. All right? So I want you to focus on one by one. What do you need to do? Okay. What I said is, what do you need to do to bring out the top voice of these chords? I think there's a tendency to make it more work than it really should be, especially if you're not using thumbs, right? So for each pair of chords, there's a slight difference in position, right? And once again, we're back to where we started actually in magnetic rag. Can you lean a little bit of weight toward that top voice? Right. And look, it's another thing to tinker with. How can we get the melody to help us tell the story? All right? And right, can you make the top voice 70% of the sound and the other three voices 10% each? Close. I got 20, 20, 20, and 40. I want more. Yeah. Right. And now that you have a melody available to you, you can start shaping it into something more linear. All right? So, Max, I'm going to wrap things up here and move on to Jared, but thank you so much. This is a really, really challenging piece to wrestle with.
Thank you.
Bravo. And Jared, Szabo or Sabo? Szabo. Jared Szabo will play Crazy Bone Rag by Charles Johns. Nicely done. Thanks, sir. All right, so we're into the land of another rag that I've never actually performed, so I'm going to have to cheat and use music a little bit. But really, I love the energy to it. I love the pep, and that's really an important part of this. See, once you kind of go beyond ragtime's big three of Scott Joplin, James Scott, and Joseph Lamb, you really start getting to much more rhythmically driven music, much less melodically oriented music. But Charles Johnson is kind of halfway between the two camps. I mean, he was not a second-rate composer. He really wrote terrific rags also. A lot of times they're more gesture-driven than melody-driven. And I want to try to find the relationship between two of the gestures. And I want to do one other thing. I want to just work on bringing out the melody. So let me hop on for a moment. I'll give you a microphone as well here. So first, melody is going to come first. You're really kind of hammering out that left hand, and it's solid, and it's accurate, and it's reliable, and that's what we need. But I also see from both hands two things. I see that you're kind of a little higher above the keys than you need to be. Come down closer. Stay closer, stay a little smaller if you can. When I'm playing stride, when I'm playing tense, I play a tenth, and as soon as I play it, I relax my hand, because that gives me more physical control to get to a chord. If I stay stretched all the time, I'm keeping muscles in the forearm tense, there's a buildup of lactic acid, and I freeze. It's no good. So I have to play a tenth and let go. But I stay close anyway. So, you know, I might have large hands to play large chords, but I don't want to stay large. I don't want to stay stretched all the time if I can help it. So when it turns into, that's going to hurt after a while, okay? I'm not saying that you're already in a place where it's physically uncomfortable, but I think you can make it more controlled by learning to relax, even between every. It'll still be clean, it'll still be reliable, even if you relax between every chord. There's always more time to move than you think. And then the second thing here is, let's get the melody to really speak out. Just for those last four notes, we want to bring out an inner voice. It allows the storytelling to happen. The storytelling is all in the melody, always. All right. So if that gets buried under the drum set, and this is our drum set, right? Drummer is too loud, if the backup band is too loud for the singer, we need to do something about it. We need to correct that balance. So let's just try a line. And we'll just tinker with one line of this. Okay. Let's dissect the left hand for a moment. There's and there's pa, right? Which one is getting more weight right now?
I'm not sure.
Play it. Play it hands together. Did it sound the same?
I think so.
Kind of. When you played it hands together, the pa starts getting a lot more weight. The pa is closer to your right hand. It feels like it's easier to control it. I want you to try to reverse that for a moment. And by the way, for a little bit of clarity here, when there's oompa in ragtime and stride and novelty piano, there are pianists that really lean into the bass. There are pianists that lean into the pa. There are pianists that kind of flex between the two. There are different ways to release. Is it oompa or is it oompa, right? There are a whole lot of different ways to do that, but we want to do it with some kind of reliability. Again, it's just the drum set. You know, if we try to elevate it and give it too much activity, it becomes distracting to the melody. So I want to try just the oompa for a moment. Oompa, 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 oompa. Okay, now, when you pop that, why so high up? Tell you what, don't touch my hand. I want you to play it under my hand. Now, next thing, get to the chord, prepare it, then play it. Don't crash land into it. Now, move faster. Move faster. Move faster, place, then play. You're going straight into it. It's right in. Instead, touch the surface of the keys, then play. Better. I want you to try freeze. Play. Freeze. Okay. Now, with that little bit of added control, I want you to take this a little further. I want you to play. Ah, it didn't stay though. You did a beautiful, and then. Okay. Now, bit by bit, you can change the balance of that. You can make it a more staccato You can make it a longer pa. You can change the dynamic balance. You can do all kinds of things to it. But I think you need to find ways to get it under control in a way that it finds a character that you really want your drum set to sound this way. And again, this is one for everyone. What does your drum set sound like? And you can really build a musical character that is distinguishable. And amongst a lot of the ragtime pianists, we can identify each other just based on the left hand alone. So it's, you know, what makes, you know, Brian Holland's left hand distinguishable from Martin Spitznagel's left hand, distinguishable from Adam Swanson's left hand. I mean, they're all very, very recognizably different. But they're all clean, and they're all prepared, and they're all reliable. And none of them get in the way of the melody. All right? So let's just try dee da 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 da. And I want you to give 90% to the melody, and then your drum set is way in the back of the stage. I liked it. I liked it. I mean, really, bravo. That was a real change in character and balance, and I thought it worked. Try it one more time. Yeah, yes. Yeah, really, bravo. I'm sorry to wrap things up here. I know an hour to work with 4 people is already kind of ridiculously compressed, but thank you, all 4 of you. You played beautifully today. You all have illustrious, magnificent careers ahead of you in ragtime. And thanks for coming. Thanks for participating and being part of this weekend's events, really. It's a treat for me. So bravo to all of you.